People today, I think, and you were just speaking to this actually, I think, are inundated. And there's a massive worldwide debate on just how we should or should not address the problems of poverty. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce to you a very fascinating individual. He is an actor, he's a writer, he's a director, he's an acting teacher, and he's a television critic. My wife and I were out of a room. We had nowhere to live. Very, very little in our wallets. What do you do when you play a character that you really don't like? Like, imagine an actor's nightmare is playing Adolf Hitler. Well, someone you just can't find any. Like, there's no joy in really playing that kind of character.
That's a good question. I mean, and there's a sort of I'm not sure who coined the answer or whatever, but there's a sort of common statement
I've had some conversations with concerned residents of shady arrests, as well as some people who are knowledgeable about flood hazards. The house is really close to the river here. I believe that's against the law.
You've reached the voicemail of Walker Carmelli. Please leave a message and your call will be returned as soon as possible. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Sean O'Connor. I received a letter from you about a video of mine. Lately, every time I touch something, I think about the bacteria growing on it.
Will Batman and Robin, escape this tank full of piranhas? Find out next week.
Safety concerns can cause a tremendous deal of anxiety. I know the pain of such anxiety because I'm a borderline hypochondriac. When I learned about infectious and genetic diseases in biology class, it scared the hell out of me, and I suffered from periodic incidents of paranoia. Here's a picture of a bacteria that grew from my hands, even after being washed with soap. Fascinating, but I get a little squeamish, and like I said, a little paranoid sometimes. Lately, every time I touch something, I think about the bacteria growing on it. Protecting ourselves from disease is one of the many safety concerns we have to deal with. The rise of ISIS, especially in the wake of the San Bernardino terrorist attack, is yet another example. Thank God, overall, the United States government has kept us pretty damn safe. We're lucky and blessed because we're a rich country. We can afford the top-of-the-line national security. Wealth really can be such a tremendous factor in your degree of safety. When you're rich, you can afford the best healthcare money can buy. You can afford to pay high property taxes that keep murderous gangs out of your community. When you're poor, it's not always so easy. Sure, there's welfare that will cover some healthcare costs, and not every poor community is necessarily plagued with dangerous crime. But the point I mean to make here is that the more money you have, the more safety you can buy. I'm not bringing up the financial considerations relevant to safety for the purpose of proclaiming to you that we need, as a country, to spend more money on welfare for the poor. And I realize that every person, rich, poor, middle class, has his or her own story about his or her own financial situation. And there's a massive worldwide debate on just how we should or should not address the problems of poverty. That's not quite the discussion I want to have with you on this episode of the Sean O'Connor Show. Instead, what I want to tell you about is a mobile home community close to my apartment. And I ask you, whoever you are, wherever you're from, whatever your socioeconomic status might be, whatever your religious, political, economic, and philosophical beliefs might be, I want to ask you to imagine, briefly, that you are unemployed, handicapped, over the age of 50, that you live in a mobile home community that is not safe, that you don't have the means, the resources to just leave, and that every time you try to voice a concern about it, it falls on deaf ears. I think it's important to put ourselves in other people's shoes sometimes. Maybe that's why I loved acting so much as a kid. I think it's important because it helps us understand perspectives other than our own. Even if after understanding another person's perspective, you find your opinions and judgments to be generally unmoved, at least you sharpen your own perspective and have, perhaps, more grounded and considerate opinions and judgments. I don't mean to digress so much here, but I am 100% committed to explaining myself as thoroughly as possible, as often as possible, so that you always know why I am telling you something. So now, about this mobile home community, Shady Rest. I've driven past it many, many times throughout the course of my nearly 30-year life, and I never thought much about it. But then, a few months ago, during my run for East Windsor Town Council, I met people who lived there, hoping that I could interest them in voting for my running mates and I that upcoming November. It was while meeting some of these folks as someone who wishes for the time being at least, to remain completely anonymous, suggested to me that several of the mobile homes some of these folks live in may have been constructed illegally on a flood zone, and that this posed a grave danger to Shady Rest residents. This individual gave me maps drawn out by the federal government that supposedly proved this claim. If the claim was true, it meant the owner of Shady Rest and the East Windsor zoning officials have violated the law. I was concerned about this, so I proceeded to mention this at a town council meeting and ask some questions.
I've had some conversations with concerned residents of Shady Rest, as well as some people who are knowledgeable about flood hazards. The house is really close to the river here. I believe that's against the law. Specifically, I believe they actually are on a floodplain zone. And so I just wanted, and if you look at it, it just looks very close. So I was wondering if there's been an investigation as to this. I certainly am investigating this, and I'm speaking with people and getting more information at this time. But if you could shed some light onto this.
The mayor told me this concern had never been brought to her attention. Now, to be honest with you, I didn't follow up on this issue right away because all throughout the campaign it seemed as if every week there was something else going on that I needed to turn my attention to. For example, the town council was threatening to privatize police dispatching services, which I was vehemently opposed to. Or our opponents, the incumbents on that town council, refused to debate us before the election, etc. Even though I didn't look more into this issue right away, another individual who wishes to remain anonymous, went onto YouTube and made a video that included a clip from my comments at that town council meeting, along with pictures of a mobile home community where flooding occurred, with the suggestion that the mobile home community was Shady Rest. I watched it, even downloaded it so I could post it on my YouTube channel, and I posted a comment about it on Facebook too, but beyond that, I didn't think much of it. That was until I got a letter from the lawyers representing the Shady Rest mobile home community. In the letter, attorney Margaret B. Carmelli claimed that the pictures in this video I thought so little about were not of Shady Rest, and that I was to cease and desist use of the video in 5 days. I suppose if I hadn't, she, on behalf of her client, the owners of Shady Rest, would have sued me. Which scared the hell out of me, because if I get sued, I have no money to give, which I suspect would mean my wages, which is a minimum wage, would be garnished. Moreover, I was furious with myself because I made a fundamental attribution error. I overlooked attribution altogether. How could I have been so mentally lazy? I could blame working a full-time job, being a part-time student, and running for town council all at once, making it easy for me to miss a lot of things, but I should have thought of that before I decided to undertake so many projects. So obviously I took down that video. And most fortunately, one of the anonymous sources I told you about was gracious enough to locate and give me the actual pictures of the flooding that occurred at Shady Rest. I'm going to share these pictures with you right now. Having corrected my mistake, I sent a voicemail to the attorney. Hello?
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, thank you. My name is Sean O'Connor, and I'm calling to speak with Mrs. Margaret B. Carmelli.
Oh, okay. Let me see if I can reach her for you. She's not in the office yet, but maybe I can conference her in. Will she know what it's in regard to?
Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Hold on for a moment.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm sorry, she didn't pick up. Would you like her voicemail for a message?
Sure, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Okay. Let me also take your number and I'll put it in her conference center.
Sure.
Okay. All right, great. And hold on for I can leave her a message.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You've reached the voicemail of Walker Carmelli. Please leave a message and your call will be returned as soon as possible. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Sean O'Connor. I received a letter from you about a video of mine. This video, which was and no longer is posted on Facebook and YouTube, was about Shady Rest, manufactured housing community. Specifically, the letter asked that I cease and desist use of this specific video because the video reflected flooding in a community, and based on the overall presentation of the video, one could possibly infer that the represented community is Shady Rest, when in fact the images were not Shady Rest. I want to assure you that this video is no longer available to the public and will never be. I am profoundly apologetic about this and want to thank you for correcting my mistake. One of my editors has informed me that the wrong pictures were edited on the video. I've now corrected this. Since you represent Shady Rest, I should inform you that I now have pictures that are very clearly of Shady Rest at the time of severe flooding, and that perhaps there may be legal problems your client could face as a consequence of my presenting them, which I will. I will be presenting these pictures on my YouTube series, The Sean O'Connor Show. I will be presenting these pictures because I'm investigating safety concerns about Shady Rest that have been brought to my attention. I'm sure your client would rather I not do this, but the media, which is the industry to which I belong, is the people's watchdog, so to speak. It is morally bound to be so, and thankfully a watchdog media is 100% protected by the First Amendment, freedom of the press. I hope you have a fantastic day. Thank you. Bye. The law firm is yet to respond to me. Maybe they won't. After all, as I stated in my voicemail, there's nothing illegal about sharing pictures. It's protected by the First Amendment. Here's what strikes me most about these pictures. Those mobile homes are extremely close to a river. And I can't help but wonder, is it ethical for them to be there? Forget whether or not it's officially legal or illegal. When you consider the fact that some of those people living in the homes you saw in those pictures are very poor, old, and handicapped, doesn't it strike you as rather a bit like exploitation on the part of the Shady Rest owners? to prioritize making a few extra bucks by housing people that close to a river with the potential to cause serious flooding over, say, looking out for those people? I say yes. Yes, it is unethical. Now I realize there are some of you who might say, well, if you're afraid of a flood, don't move into a mobile home so close to a river. No one was forced to live in those homes. Some of you might say, additionally, if you're gonna live in a flood zone, buy flood insurance. The fact is, though, it isn't always that simple. I know because I've been poorer than I am now. There have been times in my life when the only thing that saved me from homelessness was luck and the graciousness of others. This one time, my wife and I, we were just boyfriend and girlfriend at the time, we lost a room we had in a house we were living in because rent was increased too high. We found a room in another house, and it turned out we had been cleverly scammed by the men we were paying rent to. He was renting the house, and we didn't know it. And the man who owned the house wanted nothing more to do with this other man, and thus, my wife and I were out of a room. We had nowhere to live, very, very little in our wallets. By a strike of luck, when racing around central New Jersey to find a place we could afford to live in, we found one. And only because the landlord decided to waive the security deposit. God bless his soul. But my point is this. Sometimes a place to live is a place to live, and it's the only place you have the resources to situate yourself. That's a fact. So given that fact, I say that if you're somebody who sells places to live, and the owners of Shady Rest are just that, you have an obligation to make it the best place to live it could possibly be. That doesn't mean you have to make it paradise. And in fact, selling trailers for $500 a month or so for people who can't afford to pay $1,000 a month for an apartment is a very noble and generous thing to do. In that sense, I have respect for the owners of Shady Rest. They offer cheap living. Whether that cheap living is for those who are desperately seeking it or for those who simply choose to be frugal and take advantage of that opportunity, I say it's a truly fantastic thing to offer. But if you're gonna do something like that, if you're gonna offer something you know is gonna draw in, or could very likely draw in some seriously vulnerable people, look out for them. Don't set them up in an area that you know will flood. By the way, this isn't the only concern I've learned about from Shady Rest residents. It has been suggested to me, again by someone who wishes to remain anonymous, that it is possible those mobile homes haven't been renovated or replaced or anything since that particular flood you saw in the pictures. So how much mold might be growing in those homes? I've also been told that residents have a lot of other safety concerns and that Shady Rest management might be in violation of the American Disability Act. To be clear, I am not alleging that they are. I am merely telling you that people have told me they fear this might be the case. I'm told there might be out-of-date plumbing at Shady Rest. I'm told there's concern over a lack of fire hydrants. One anonymous source alleges that it's expected that even the elderly and handicapped residents are to shovel snow when snowstorms hit. I cannot confirm any of this yet, but I am looking into it. I have been trying to get residents of the community to speak with me on camera for the record about these and other safety concerns they have. I'll even extend an invitation to the owners of Shady Rest to answer my questions and defend themselves against these and any allegations. Expect more on this in future episodes of The Sean O'Connor Show. At this point, I want to change the subject. I want to talk to you about more than one thing per episode, if I can. Why? Because there's a lot to discuss in this life. There's a lot to discuss about this story of humanity's existence that we're a part of. And that's really the motivation behind this program. Discussing those issues relevant to humanity's existence. More specifically, politics and culture, or the rules we live by versus the ones we ought to live by in our society, and the interesting things people contribute to our society, good or bad. Our economy and or culture. You could think of this show as a time capsule, featuring opinions on the nature of the time analyzed in the capsule. Since I decided to launch this program, I've done a lot of thinking about how exactly I want it to be and what I want it to do. And I have decided to be as transparent with you as possible. I'm mildly anxious to be so open with you about this because the fact is this show is in the very early stages of development, which means it's ripe for a lot of technical criticism on your part, which I welcome, of course, and because I've had a bad track record when it comes to committing to projects. After all, a few months ago, I told everybody I wanted to be the President of the United States. Well, part of me still does, but I so deeply value the opinion sharing in the media, and I'm so deeply troubled by the lack of objectivity and scope in today's political and cultural commentary, which can make or break politicians and thus destroy or pave the way for good or bad policy, that I have to give my voice a go here. Good political and cultural commentary, in my opinion, requires good discussion. That's why I value this modern tradition of commentator gives monologue and then has guests he or she interviews, has discussions with, like we see on the O'Reilly Fact or Rachel Maddow or the Glenn Beck program. So I have the great pleasure of really switching gears here from the ethics of mobile homes, if you will, to art and entertainment as I introduce to you my guest.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce to you a very fascinating individual. He is an actor, he's a writer, he's a director, he's an acting teacher, and he's a television critic. Also happens to have been a friend of mine for almost 20 years, I think, something like that.
At least half our lives.
Yeah, at least half our lives. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Mr. Timothy Moran.
Hello.
How you doing?
Doing okay. This
Good.
is very excited to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Glad to have you. Glad to have you. Very much so. So, as I stated, you are an actor, a writer, a director, acting teacher, and television critic. I'm very curious. Which of these do you enjoy the most, and why?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, I like them all equally, and I think that's it's a good way to go about your life, is to try to enjoy everything you do as much as possible. At different times, I think I favor one over the other. Right now I've been primarily focusing on acting and acting teaching. So I'm kind of in the actor zone right now and on an actor's high. I just played the lead role in It's a Wonderful Life, which was done at Kelsey Theater and just finished up this past weekend. But it was a great time, and that was a huge role and a very big opportunity for me, and I greatly appreciate the experience. So for now, I guess if I had to answer, I'd say I enjoy being an actor the most right now because that's what I'm doing mostly. But I enjoy all those other things very much as well.
Yeah, you just mentioned your starring role in a production of It's a Wonderful Life. You had a great poster for it. I'm wondering, what did you learn by being a part of that classic story?
I guess in terms of playing the role of George Bailey and in terms of what that character went through and and the experience of that show and experience of not only of making that show but also the story of that show. I think one of the most important things I took away from it was to always like sort of find the positive in things. And I've always tried to approach life in that way, or at least certainly life in terms of being an actor or writer, director, all that stuff. But this really reinforced and sort of reignited my passion and my assertion that you can always find the positive even if things are going bad. Like there were as in any show there were stresses and ups and downs in that production. The tech week was very stressful because we only got to be in the actual theater the last week of rehearsals, and we knew that there was a lot of set changes and a lot of just technical elements that were going to have to come together very quickly. And as is often the case, it was things took a while to get to progress and to become fluid with in terms of the scene changes and stuff. And I had a lot of costume changes, which that's not one of my skills as an actor is doing quick costume changes off stage. So that was kind of challenging for me. But even with all the stress of that, once everything worked out, and you just sort of focused on the friends you made in the cast, and you focused on the story, you focused on the acting, and the audience's appreciation of the show, it was able to make all the negative stuff just went away, and you realize it's like I did sort of realize the way the Jimmy Stewart character or the George Bailey character in the play thinks his life is not going that well, and then he realizes it's so great. There were times where it felt like the show wasn't going to work, or my performance wasn't working as well as I thought it would, or I wouldn't be able to handle the costume changes. And then you realize all the great stuff's out there about everything, and then you learn to just really focus on it and appreciate that. That was a long-winded answer, but
no, that's great. So I'm curious, does this happen for you as an actor every time you take on a role that you kind of gain something from the person you became?
I don't. Probably. I mean, I
don't. Certain roles you maybe take more from than other roles.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you take. I think you always take something from it, and I mean, I don't. That's a good question, and I think a lot of actors get that question, and maybe a lot of them probably think about that more and have better answers. I mean, I that's probably true. I don't usually think of it like in that perspective, as in well, this is going to. Like, oh, well, that happened, and that teaches me this life lesson, and I'm going to apply it to life moving forward. I probably do that, more subconsciously. But to sort of answer your question, referring to what I talked about before about being positive and always finding the good thing, I always look at I try to look at every experience in life, but certainly every show I've ever been a part of, I always try to look at that as there's something positive about it. So I did shows in the past. Long time ago, back when I was in college or high school, or right out of college, something, where maybe I didn't, maybe I didn't like the character I was playing, or I didn't like the story, but I made some good friends, or maybe I
don't mean to interrupt you,
sure.
But what do you do when you play a character that you really don't like? Like, imagine an actor's nightmare is playing Adolf Hitler.
Well,
someone you just can't find any, there's no joy in playing that kind of character.
That's a good question. I mean, and there's a sort of I'm not sure who coined the answer or whatever, but there's a sort of common statement or I'm forgetting the word, common phrase, whatever, the idea that common saying is that Adolf Hitler didn't think he was a bad guy. Adolf Hitler had his reasons, thought he was doing good. So you're never supposed to judge your character that you play. And I have played some villainous characters before, and I've played some characters that I thought were maybe too weak or just not interesting enough. And generally, what you try to do, and I think what I try to do is find it's fine, like the reason why why that character thinks these things or has these opinions, because everyone thinks they want to do something because they think it's the right thing to do, because they expect good to come out of it, because it's good for them or for their perspective on life in a certain way.
So acting can really be quite a psychology study, an individual psychology.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think it helps a lot with acting in general, or even writing, or even directing. And it certainly, I think, helps me that I'm also very interested in not so much on a professional or academic level, but just in a everyday psychology, sociology, look like the human condition and being introspective and understanding what makes other people tick, understanding what makes myself tick, and understanding what makes your characters tick. So yeah, I definitely think that having an understanding of psychology, and especially of the human condition and everything, that's almost essential, if not essential, really, to being an actor, because you have to you have to know why they're saying what they're saying, and even in some ways more so as a writer, and oftentimes as a director too. Basically, being a storyteller, most stories are about people, and usually you're trying to tell stories that audiences can relate to. So if you're playing a character, you wrote a character, you're directing a play about someone who, like in It's a Wonderful Life, who is depressed and is on the verge of suicide. Many people have been depressed or have had bad times. Many people have even tried to commit suicide and whatnot. And so the idea is, if you're honest to those emotions and honest to the reasons why the person is feeling that way, someone in the audience is going to, or hopefully many people in the audience are going to recognize elements of that character in themselves, and that's what makes them appreciate. That's what makes them say, I've been there, or I totally under that. When your character made that face when he was really happy, like I've made that face myself before. Other people have made that face, and it's just it's so everyone can sort of relate to it, and it's a shared experience.
Okay. Well, you and I have been friends for a long time now. We've had lots of conversations. One of the most interesting things you've ever said to me is that you think the quality of movies has gone down, while the quality of television shows has gone up. Can you explain why you think this?
I do think that's it's not just something I have necessarily stated, but I think it's a big common debate in terms of film versus television over the past 10 or so or more years, it's funny if you ask me. If you ask me now, I would maybe argue that film hasn't. I think it's less about film quality going down as it is about television quality going up. I think there's still good films being made today, whether they're independent or even in the studio system. And I think there's certain, there's even a big blockbuster, that's action and special effects, spectacle, all that. There is, there are well made, technically speaking, action films and blockbusters, and then there are poorly made ones, and there's still a lot of skill that goes involved in that. But I think the big thing is that TV just has made leaps and bounds.
And when did that happen? When did TV start to make all these leaps and bounds, in your opinion?
I would say a big part of it was in the late '90s, and was one of the biggest, I think, television shows that was most responsible for that is Sopranos, and HBO, and sort of extending beyond that, it's the idea of HBO and cable networks that didn't have restrictions, and that were sort of starting out in terms of original programming. They could afford to take chances, and they didn't have anything to lose.
And they almost treated these movies like long movies series,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. That was part of it too. Is the idea that of telling one long story every season or even throughout a whole series, and the idea of continuity, and the fact that when you think about shows from the beginning of television, even through the '90s, a lot of times, especially on networks, a family sitcom is every episode they sort of reboot. You know, it's the younger brother is always going to be a goof off. You know, and even when he learns a lesson at the end of the episode, and it's a very special lesson. You know, don't steal your sister's dolls. Whatever. The next episode, he's stealing his sister's diary. You know, because it's this, and the mom is always they're sort of the same, and the dad's always the same, and family sitcom is, it's again always resetting, and it's always the same formula, and it's the sort of same basic stories every episode. Same with with a cop show. The cops don't usually change that much. They just keep going after different murder suspects or whatever. Medical shows, lawyer shows. But what started happening in as early as I'd say probably the 80s, even possibly, my television knowledge is not as I'm totally blanking now. Is not so fine tuned to remember the everything from the 70s or 60s. But I'd say the 80s and definitely the late 90s, especially like I said with Sopranos, that was a show that that didn't just have standalone episodes. That had characters change, even if it was very slowly, and that was more cinematic in its visual storytelling, was more nuanced and intelligent sort of in its approach to writing and the characterization, and so HBO was a big part of that, and then again a lot more cable basic cable networks like FX or AMC with Mad Men and Breaking Bad. Those are two big changes, and just all these different shows that showed that you could experiment and tell interesting, bold new stories, but also, especially within the case of Sopranos, which like I said started it. That also made that got a lot of big ratings. It made a lot of money for HBO, so it was not only popular with the masses, but it was also popular with the critics and with the awards voters. And that's always that's I think that's the great merging of business and of commerce and artistry that people are always looking for in the entertainment industry. To find a movie or a TV show, or even a musical artist or whatever that is popular with audiences and that is going to make money for the business people, but also has a certain amount of artistic merit that is important to the artists themselves and people who appreciate that, and artists, critics in the critical community.
Okay. So what is your favorite television show and why?
My favorite television show is Lost, and I think one of the main things I like about it is that, as I was mentioning before, it's the fact that it was more or less one long story that it was told over the 6 years, and plenty of people will argue that that it didn't really end up being the most cohesive story. There were a lot of tangents. And I won't necessarily say that's wrong, but to me it was a great example of each episode sort of leading into the next. There were these great cliffhangers. In fact, specifically one of my favorite experiences when I first started watching Lost was I was watching the first season on DVD. I caught up with Lost about halfway through its run, and I remember I'd be watching it at night. And I'd have the DVD, and it would be 10:30 at night, and I had work in the morning, and I'd say, okay, I'm watching this one episode, and then that's it, and then that episode would end with a great cliffhanger, and I just had to know what was going to happen in the next episode. I had to continue, So I was like, okay, I'm going to watch another episode, and it's like almost midnight now. I've got to go to bed. I've got work in the morning, and that would be another great cliffhanger, and I just okay, one more episode finally, So it just really sucked you in. And made you want to continue watching, and I thought it was it was overall a very well told long story. The characters were great, the writing was great, even again like I said, cinematically, visually, the fact that it took place on an island for most of the story. It was something you don't see in a lot of TV shows. Just the visuals were different, and The music was fantastic. I mean, I feel like if you ever wanted to, I could talk about Lost for another 2 or 3 episodes of this show. But that's sort of broadly one of the many reasons I love that show.
You know, it's interesting the point you made about how the entire series is like one long story, and the cliffhangers at the end of every episode. That was how I actually started watching Parenthood. Didn't want to watch it. My wife Ashley was like, "Oh, let's give her a look," and then say, "Sure, make her happy wife, happy life," And but you'd finish the first episode, and I want to know what's going to happen, and the next thing you know, you've watched like 4 episodes.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is because that's what soap operas have been doing for years.
Sure.
So I wonder how this caught on when soap operas have been doing it since the beginning of soap opera, but then it caught on regular, prime time.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because I say that talk about cliffhangers and the idea of you want to watch the next one, and that's not exactly like you said a novel thing. It started with in the past 10 years or with Lost or anything like that. It's common. It was common of like you said soap operas. I think. Again, my knowledge of some of the earlier TV is not as all inclusive or as concrete as my knowledge of current TV, but I'm sure that there you could find other examples even beyond soap operas of television shows that especially like adventure serials or even like cartoons. Or I remember the Batman series with Adam. This is from the '60s. That was always, they have a lot of 2-part or 3-part episodes. And it'd be, will Batman and Robin, escape this tank full of piranhas? Find out next week. So sometimes they did do stuff like that. But I think back then it was, even if you still had continuations, it was. Sometimes it would it would be like only a 2-part or 3-part thing. So once that 2 or 3 episodes was done, it would sort of go back to resetting things, and you wouldn't have a one long season long.
And I always felt let down when that would happen because that those 3 episodes, 4 episodes where you always wanted to know what happened, and all of a sudden it goes back to that bland formula.
Yeah, and I mean, and there's there's still there's merit to both. I mean, I still like a lot of network television, a lot of television that is a bit more procedural.
I can't bear it. I'll tell you. One of my favorite shows is I Love Lucy, and the first few seasons, it's just that strict formula. Yeah. But then all of a sudden, they start referring to things that happened in the past episode, and you see a little bit of a story unfolding, and then all of a sudden you feel more compelled to keep watching, or at least I.
But anyway, but to sort of more specifically answer your question, I think part of the big change, and we've been sort of talking around this, is the idea of you said watching 4 episodes out of nowhere in the middle of the day, like that's binge watching, and that binge watching is a totally accepted term now in terms of just certainly within the critical community, and I think even culturally, a lot of people know the word binge now in relation to not getting drinking too much or anything like that or eating too much food, but just watching too much TV. And the thing is, and this is I think what helped Lost. Certainly helped me get into Lost, was the advent in the late '90s and early 2000s of having you can have TV shows on DVD. You can now, especially now in the past 10 years or 5 years with streaming sites like Netflix and Hulu and Amazon, the idea is you can back then you kind of had to make. Or at least the creative people thought that they had to make I Love Lucy, 25, 30 episodes a year, each episode sort of its own thing that was repeatable because people weren't, people couldn't even tape on VCR back then their shows, so they had the one chance to watch it unless the network was going to re-air it at some point as a repeat. So if you were going to miss, and people again even now people are super busy, so it's not like people can watch their favorite show live every week, So if you're out on a Tuesday night and you miss your favorite sitcom episode, and it's all one long story, and you miss week 1 and you miss week 5 and miss week 10, and it's all one story, you're going to be very confused and lost. So you have to you kind of had to be repetitive in that sense. And now with the fact that people can just, and people do this, they say, oh, I'm not going to watch the new season of Walking Dead. I'm going to wait till it's all done, or it all comes on DVD, or it all comes to Netflix, and then I'm going to watch 8 episodes of Walking Dead within a weekend or whatever. And you can follow the whole story, even if it's very complicated and very, it's all heavy continuity. And maybe people can binge, and people can catch up on old shows like I Love Lucy, get catching up with it now, or they can watch newer shows, and I guess I already answered it, but I think the idea that of being able to watch stuff, whenever you want on your schedule and watching it back to back, that storytellers and TV creators are allowed to tell very complicated, intensive, in-depth stories because now audiences can afford to watch that and appreciate it for what it was meant to be.
I was reading through your posts on your blog and realized, there's a lot of TV shows I've never heard of. People today, I think, and you were just speaking to this actually, I think, are inundated with possible venues of entertainment. We've got video games, movies, with the success of websites like Netflix, new and old TV shows for people to watch. With all of this in mind, just how are we to decide, what form of entertainment, and what specific, entertainment item, we should be engaging in. And, additionally, if somebody wants to appreciate the best of television, how does he or she go about watching the classics as well as keeping up with what's new? When, again, we only have so much time to take all of this in. We're absolutely inundated with it.
Oh, totally. There, within the critical community, and I want to point out that I'm not embedded in there. I'm not a critic of high name recognition, but I follow the critical community pretty closely, and I do, as Sean pointed out, I do sometimes write for my TV blog, and I certainly will talk to anyone whoever wants to discuss it. Hence, partly why I'm here. But within the like I said, the critical community, the sort of the big term this fall is too much TV, which was actually to sort of go behind the scenes a bit. It was the Television Critics Association press tour, which is a biannually big sort of press event that they have for the critics and advertisers to sort of see what all the different networks have for the new schedules and stuff. And the president of FX, which is one of the networks I mentioned before, which has a lot of great shows on and had some great shows on before, coined the term too much TV, and now all the critics are talking about it, and it's basically what you said. It's just there's so much out there now. I think they said at the press tour that it's projected by the end of this year, which is actually coming up now soon, there will have been I want to say around 400 scripted television shows on air. So that doesn't even include reality, and it doesn't include all the stuff you can find on streaming sites that are old. So there's just again too much TV for anyone to watch. Even the people who make money and are TV critics as a full-time job, there's not enough. And I think you and I actually the other day were talking about this off air or whatever about how to catch up on certain shows. I guess sort of the first part of your question, which was just more about how what can we do about how there's too much TV is I think I think in some ways it's a good problem to have because when you think about it, there's also too much music out there. I think if you especially when you look beyond the major releases and you think about independent or foreign cinema, there's probably too much film out there. There's so many different options you can watch.
Do you think that something has happened in our culture where anybody can do it? So
that's part of it. Yes.
Anybody can go out and make a movie. Anybody can go out and make a song, and I don't know, maybe our standards have gone down then too, because anybody can do it. The amateur appeal is is a novelty to some people. That not only are we inundated with so much of it, but so much of it is crap. And do you think?
I more or less. I mean, I think one of the arguments I get into with a lot of people, especially older generations, they talk about, music isn't the same as it was, back in my day, or movies aren't the same as back it was in my day. And,
well, imagine how Vivaldi and Beethoven feel.
I mean, yeah. I mean, with music especially. I mean, the thing with TV is that it's still actually a very, compared to music and even compared to cinema, TV is a very young medium. But I mean, that's the thing. Music has been around forever practically. So obviously, you people can make room and can appreciate things as diverse as Vivaldi and Beethoven and Bach, and versus the Stones and the Beatles, versus Tupac and Eminem, versus other country artists or artists of any genre and artists of any time. And the thing about people when they say it's not the same as it was, the golden age of movies was the 60s or 70s, or the golden age of music was whatever. The thing is, or people say there's nothing good on TV now. There's the music is terrible today. The fact is, in my opinion, there is so much TV out there, so much music out there, and even maybe to a lesser extent, but still to some extent, so much movies out there, so many films out there, that of course, if you take person A and show them 20 different things, they might find 15 of those things horrible. I mean, there's a lot of TV that I have no interest in watching, or that I have watched sometimes and I think is pretty atrocious. Yes, and there's plenty of music that I'm not interested in, or I've listened to and I don't care for it. But the fact is, there's so much that it's the odds that you couldn't find a ton of great stuff out there and also a ton of horrible stuff. I think are just. I just think the odds are totally meant for that. Like I think you're bound to find, if you looked hard enough, everyone can find one TV show or song or movie that they love and one that they hate. So the idea that that we're not, and again, movies going downhill even, it's like in some ways they have, but in some ways they haven't. There's always going to be.
They probably haven't even reached their potential yet. Like if you think about it, you're talking about how music has been around forever,
sure,
right? Imagine then, when music first happened, and it's, getting into its second century of being, and everybody's like, oh man, the music has gone down the hill. I mean, they hadn't even heard of the Beethoven and the Bach yet. So it's just amazing to imagine what something like television would be, 100, 200, even 1,000 years from now.
I can't even fathom.
And especially all of the TV you'd have to go through to appreciate the.
Well, yeah, and that's sort of sort of related to one of your questions. Something I've been thinking about as we're talking about this is I'm always fascinated by the idea that that you have your Bachs and your Beethovens and your Mozarts and a ton of others that are well known, and maybe in terms of classical music there actually weren't that many others out there, but you got to think. For all the ones that somehow stand the test of time, when you think of Shakespeare with playwriting, back then, there were also plenty of other playwrights, musicians, in terms of cinema, filmmakers, whatever, actors, that, when you think about the early days of cinema, and you think about the classics that we still sort of, hold up high and we still love, like a Citizen Kane or a Gone with the Wind or Wizard of Oz. Think about all the movies that came out in the 30s that at the time were just as loved, probably, if not more so, and that that certain people still are going to appreciate. But it's just, again, it's like you have to keep making room for the new stuff in a way. So eventually, when there were only 100 movies ever made in the first, the very earliest years, you can pick out of 100 of those, 50 that you might really like, but then, when you add another 100 movies to that, suddenly you're going to have to only pick, 25 of those first 100, and it's going to keep getting smaller. Will Batman and Robin, escape this tank full of piranhas? Find out next week.